I'm starting this reassembly by reattaching the LED halo back to the main board. Once you're hovered right over the position, apply a little bit of pressure and you should hear that satisfying little click. Now fold over the main board onto the chassis and make sure these buttons are all the way popped through. I use a screwdriver sometimes, but it's also able to get a good wiggle and pop right on through. Just give them a click and make sure they've actually come through and that they don't fall out. Now replace the single T5 screw that we took out and put it right in the middle. That should hold on the main board. Make sure not to over tighten any of the screws, especially the other ones and this one. A lot of it's plastic. This one's attached to the PCB, but you don't want to do that, okay? Just give them a gentle turn and kind of wiggle the PCB to make sure it's not loose. Once it's taut, it should be okay. The next part I'm going to do is recently changed. A lot of people had told me that there was an easier way to do it than the way I was doing it, which is to squeeze my screwdriver in and reattach the next ribbon cable to the main board. And that's by releasing this screw right here and removing the battery compartment PCB altogether before reattaching that cable. After removing this screw, which is the only one that'll be required for this small PCB, the next thing to do is to pop off this single ribbon cable, and that'll be the last thing that's holding this small battery PCB onto that assembly. I'm assuming everybody's already taken their controller apart, so this next part is not too complicated. Place the plastic handle piece over the LEDs in the front of the controller and kind of just rock it back into place. And now we're going to be able to see how removing that PCB makes this next part a lot easier. Connecting that ribbon cable that goes from the power battery compartment to the PCB is a whole lot easier now that you can actually see the entire thing. Before, I was actually just squeezing my screwdriver in before just leaving a tiny, barely visible gap and just spending a good minute getting that little thing into place, and now it's a whole lot easier. Once again, you'll know it's in position whenever you get that satisfying little snap. Now we can replace the battery assembly that we've taken out. I hadn't screwed down that plastic handle piece yet because it does need a little bit of give to get this battery compartment back in. It's held on by pressure at the top and that single screw at the bottom. So now we can just replace that single screw and then reattach the ribbon cable, which surprise, I actually forgot in this first take. So I don't think you'll see me replace it, or I'll have a cutscene right here. But anyway, you'll see at one point where maybe I cut to it and replace it, and then in the next scene you actually, if you look close enough, you can see that it's not attached whenever I close it up. And I left the blooper reel at the end. So don't forget to attach that ribbon cable before closing up the next handle piece. And with the magic of editing, I didn't forget this time. And now I'm going to replace 3 of the handle screws, the top right, top left, and the bottom left, leaving the bottom right for until I get that last plastic piece on. And of course, don't forget to adjust if this is the right controller instead of the left controller. It's pretty simple to kind of adjust and reverse order whatever I'm saying. They're pretty identical and symmetric. This last piece is by far my least favorite part to put back on. It was one of the hardest whenever I first started taking these apart. And the best method I found is to hold this bottom part and then just apply as much pressure as I really can to that, getting it to flip over that lip. Here you can see a pretty common occurrence, and the grip button is actually still flat. I think it's one of the a part of that gets caught on it, but you're going to want to definitely double check and make sure that it's not like that and it's compressible before you do it. I just removed it, popped it back on, and make sure it's compressible this time. Now I can finally replace that bottom right, the longest screw. And then finally the 3 screws in the battery compartment. The longest one towards the top and the 2 small ones towards the bottom that were originally covered up by the sticker. And now finally the top can be replaced. I usually adjust it before squeezing it too tightly down that this menu button is still clickable, and that's whenever I know that it's in the right position. And the last step is to place in a battery to test, and maybe the tethering string. And we're going to hold down the top button and the menu button, or in this case Y and menu button, and make sure we can see that white LED flash and we'll know we're good to go. And that's it for the reassembly. There's a few things I've done wrong, and that's actually what I'm kind of including here. A lot of times I forgot to reattach the cables, which is the main thing I've always forgotten, either the one attaching the battery assembly, and since I've started removing that battery assembly, here you could actually see me forgetting to reattach that, I guess the second power ribbon cable. I think filming this reassembly video I had to actually take it back apart about at least twice, and a smarter thing to do would be to actually check that LED test during the, I think right after you reattach the ribbon cables, place in a battery before you actually screw everything back together, especially that second plastic piece that's so kind of annoying to snap in. It's a real bugger to get to the end and then have to unscrew and redo everything. So doing that little power test before you put on the cosmetics and bolting everything down is a real advantage. So thanks for watching. If you'd like to see anything else, let me know in the comments. I've got a couple other issues I've had, like the trigger button I think sticking, and some other things that I don't think everybody else would have had, like I had a capacitor fall off, but that was from pretty hard throws. Anyway, thanks for watching again. Enjoy the last few seconds of my screw ups, and talk to y'all later.